Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western literary canon out loud. Today we are continuing in Book 4 of The Well at the World's End, a tale by William Morris. We are on Chapter 12, entitled The Roads Sunder Again. Ralph and Ursula, with the sage and Michael a Dale, went their ways, and all was smooth with them. And they saw but few folk, and those mild and lowly. At last of an afternoon they saw before them afar off the towers and pinnacles of Whitwall, and Ralph's heart rose within him so that he scarce knew how to contain himself. But Ursula was shy and silent, and her colour came and went, as though some fear had hold of her. Now they two were riding on somewhat ahead of the others, so Ralph turned to Ursula and asked what ailed her. She smiled on him and said, "A simple sickness. I am drawing nigh to thy home, and I am ashamed. Beyond the mountains, who knew what and whence I was? I was fair, and for a woman not unvaliant, and that was enough. But now, when I am coming amongst the baronages and the lineages, what shall I do to hold up my head before the fools and the dastards of these high kindreds? And that all the more, my knight, because thou art changed since yesteryear, and since we met on the want-away to the Wood Perilous, when I forbade thee remember that thou wert a king's son, and I a yeoman's daughter. For then thou wert but a lad, high-born and beautiful, but simple maybe, and untried, whereas now thou art meet to sit in the Kaiser's throne, and rule the world from the holy city." He laughed gaily and said, "What? Is it all so soon forgotten, our deeds beyond the mountains? Belike because we had no minstrel to rhyme it for us. Or is it all but a dream? And has the last pass of the mountains changed all that for us? What then? Hast thou never become my beloved, nor lain in one bed with me? Thou, whom I looked to deliver from the shame and the torment of Utterbol, never didst thou free thyself without my helping, and meet me in the dark wood, and lead me to the sage, who rideth yonder behind us. No, nor didst thou ride fearless with me, leaving the world behind, nor didst thou comfort me when my heart went nigh to breaking in the wilderness. Nor thee did I deliver as I saw thee running naked from the jaws of death. Nor were we wedded in the wilderness far from our own folk. Nor didst thou deliver me from the venom of the dry tree. Yea, verily, nor did we drink together of the water of the well. It is all but tales of Swevenham, a blue vapour hanging on the mountains yonder. So be it then, and here we ride together, deedless, a man and a maid of whom no tale may be told. What next, then, and who shall sunder us?" Therewith he drew his sword from the sheath, and tossed it into the air, and caught it by the hilts as it came down, and he cried out, "Hearken, Ursula, by my sword I swear it, that when I come home to the little land, if my father and my mother and all my kindred fall not down before thee and worship thee, then will I be a man without kindred, and I will turn my back on the land I love, and the house wherein I was born, and will win for thee and me a new kindred that all the world shall tell of. So help me St. Nicholas and All Hallows and the Mother of God." She looked on him with exceeding love, and said, "Ah, beloved, how fair thou art! Is it not as I said, yea, and more, that now lieth the world at thy feet, if thou wilt stoop to pick it up? Believe me, sweet, all folk shall see this as I see it, and shall judge betwixt thee and me, and deem me not." "Beloved," he said, "thou dost not wholly know thyself, and I deem that the mirrors of steel serve thee but ill. And now must thou have somewhat else for a mirror, to wit, the uprising and increase of trouble concerning thee in thy fairness, and the strife of them that love thee overmuch, who shall strive to take thee from me. And when the blade that hath seen the well at the world's end shall come up out of his sheath, and take me and thee from the hubbub into the quiet fields of my father's home, and then shalt thou be learned of thyself, when thou seest that thou art the desire of all hearts." "Ah, the wisdom of thee," she said, "and thy valiancy, and I am become feeble and foolish before thee. What shall I do then?" He said, "Many a time shall it be shown what thou shalt do, but here and now is the highway, dry and long, and the plain meads and acres on either hand, and a glimmer of Whitwall afar off, and the little cloud of dust about us too, in the late spring weather, and the sage and Michael riding behind us, and smiting dust from the hard road. And now if this all be a dream, let it speedily be gone, and let us wake up in the ancient house of Upmeads, which thou hast never seen, and thou and I in each other's arms. Chapter 13. They come to Whitwall again. Herewith they were come to a little thorp where the way sundered, for the highway went on to Whitwall, and a byway turned off to Swevenham. Thereby was a poor hostel, where they stayed and rested for the night, because evening was at hand. So when those four had eaten and drunk there together, Ralph spoke and said, Michael a Dale, thou art for Swevenham tomorrow? Yea, lord, said Michael, belike I shall yet find kindred there, and I call to thy mind that I craved of thee to lead me to Swevenham as payment for all I had done aught for thy service. Sooth is that, said Ralph, thou shalt go with my good will, and as I deem thou shalt not lack company betwixt here and Swevenham, whereas our dear friend here, the friend of thy father's father, is going the same road. Then the sage of Swevenham leaned across the board and said, What word hath come out of my mouth, my son? Said Ralph, smiling on him, It is the last word which we have heard from thee of this matter, though verily it was spoken a while ago. What wilt thou add to it as now? This, quoth the sage, that I will leave thee no more till thou biddest me go from thee. Was this word needful? Ralph reached his hand up to him and said, It is well and more, but the road hence to Upmeads may yet be a rough one. Yea, said the sage, yet shall we come thither all living, unless my sight now faileth. Then Ursula rose up and came to the old man and cast her arms about him and said, Yea, father, come with us, and let thy wisdom bless our roof-tree. Wilt thou not teach our children wisdom? Yea, maybe our children's children, since thou art a friend of the well. I know not of the teaching of wisdom, said the sage, but as to my going with thee, it shall be as I said and now. And forsooth I looked for this bidding of thee to make naught of the word which I spoke, ere yet I had learned wisdom of thee. Therewith were they merry and fain of each other, and evening wore amidst great content. But when morning was come, they gat to horse, and Ralph spake to Michael and said, Well, friend, now must thou ride alone to thy kindred, and may fair days befall thee in Swevenham. But if thou deem at any time that matters go not well with thee, as thou wouldest, then turn thine head to Upmeads, and try it there, and we shall further thee all we may. Then came the sage to Michael, as he sat upon his horse, a stalwart man of some 40 winters, and said, Michael a Dale, reach me thine hand. So did he, and the sage looked into the palm thereof, and said, This man shall make old bones, and it is more like than not, king's son, that he shall seek to thee at Upmeads, ere he die. Said Ralph, His coming shall be a joy to us, how pleasant soever our life may be otherwise. Farewell, Michael, all good go with thee for thine wholesome redes. So then Michael gave them farewell, and rode his ways to Swevenham, going hastily, as one who should hurry away from a grief. But the three held on their way to Whitwall, and it was barely noon when they came to the gate thereof on a Saturday of latter May. It was a market day, and the streets were thronged, and they looked on the folk, and were fain of them, since they seemed to be something more than aliens. The folk also looked on them curiously, and deemed them goodly, both the old man and the 2 knights, for they thought no otherwise of Ursula than that she was a carle. But now as they rode, slowly because of the crowd, up Petergate, they heard a cry of one beside them, as of a man astonished, but joyful. So Ralph drew rein and turned thither whence the cry came, and Ursula saw a man wide-shouldered, grey-haired, blue-eyed, and ruddy of countenance, a man warrior-like to look on, and girt with a long sword. Ralph lighted down from his horse and met the man who was coming toward him. He cast his arms about his neck and kissed him, and lo, it was Richard the Red. The people round about, when they saw it, clapped their hands and crowded about the two, crying out, Hail to the friends long parted, and now united. But Richard, who most knew, cried out, Make way, my masters, will ye sunder us again? Then he said to Ralph, "Get into thy saddle, lad, for surely thou hast a tale to tell overlong for the open street." Ralph did as he was bidden, and without more ado they went on all toward that hostelry where Ralph had erst borne the burden of grief. Richard walked by Ralph's side, and as he went on he said, "Moreover, lad, I can see that thy tale is no ill one. Therefore my heart is not wrung for thee or me, though I wait for it a while." Then again he said, "Thou doest well to hide her loveliness in war-weed, even in this town of peace." Ursula reddened, and Richard laughed and said, "Well, it is a fair rose which thou hast brought from Eastway. There will be never another couple in these parts like you. Now I see the words on thy lips, so I tell thee that Blaise thy brother is alive and well and happy, which last word means that his coffer is both deep and full. Forsooth, he would make a poor bargain in buying any kingship that I wot of, so rich he is, yea, and mighty withal." Said Ralph, "And how went the war with Walter the Black?" Even as he spake his face changed, and he bethought him over closely of the past days, and his dream of the Lady of Abundance, and of Dorothea, who rode by him now as Ursula. But Richard spake, "Short is the tale to tell. I slew him in shock of battle, and his men craved peace of the good town. Many were glad of his death, and few sorrowed for it, for fair as his young body was, he was a cruel tyrant." Therewith were they come to the hostel of the Lamb, which was the very same house wherein Ralph had abided aforetime. And as he entered it, it is not to be said but that inwardly his heart bled for the old sorrow. Ursula looked on him lovingly and blithely. And when they were within doors, Richard turned to the sage and said, "Hail to thee, reverend man. Wert thou 40 years older to behold, outworn and forgotten of death, I should have said that thou wert like to the sage that dwelt alone amidst the mountains nigh to Swevenham, when I was a little lad, and fearsome was the sight of thee unto me." The sage laughed and said, "Yea, somewhat like I am yet to myself of 40 years ago. Good is thy memory, greybeard." Then Richard shook his head and spake under his breath, "Yea, then it was no dream or coloured cloud, and he hath drank of the waters, and so then hath my dear lord." Then he looked up bright-faced and called on the serving-men, and bade one lead them into the fair chamber, and another go forth and provide a banquet to be brought in thither. So they went up into a goodly chamber high aloft, and Ursula went forth from it a while, and came back presently clad in very fair woman's raiment, which Ralph had bought for her at Goldburg. Richard looked on her and nothing else for a while. Then he walked about the chamber uneasily, now speaking with the sage, now with Ursula, but never with Ralph. At last he spake to Ursula and said, "Grant me a grace, lady, and be not wroth if I take thy man into the window yonder, that I may talk with him privily, while ye hold converse together, thou and the sage of Swevenham." She laughed merrily and said, "Sir nurse, take thy bantling and cosset him in whatso corner thou wilt, and I will turn away mine eyes from thy caresses." So Richard took Ralph into a window, and sat down beside him, and said, "Mayhappen I shall sadden thee by my question, but I mind me what our last talking together was about, and therefore I must needs ask thee this. Was that other one fairer than this one is?" Ralph knit his brows. "I wot not," quoth he, "since she is gone, that other one." "Yea," said Richard, "but this I say, that she is without a blemish. Did ye drink of the well together?" "Yea, surely," said Ralph. Said Richard, "And is this woman of a good heart? Is she valiant?" "Yea, yea," said Ralph, flushing red. "As valiant as was that other?" said Richard. Said Ralph, "How may I tell, unless they were tried in one way?" Yet Richard spake, "Are ye wedded?" "Even so," said Ralph. "Dost thou deem her true?" said Richard. "Truer than myself," said Ralph in a voice which was somewhat angry. Quoth Richard, "Then is it better than well, and better than well. For now hast thou wedded into the world of living men, and not to a dream of the land of faery." Ralph sat silent a little, and as if he were swallowing somewhat. At last he said, "Old friend, I were well content if thou wert to speak such words no more, for it irks me, and woundeth my heart." Said Richard, "Well, I will say no more thereof. Be content therefore, for now I have said it, And thou needest not fear me, what I have to say thereon any more, and what mayest well wot that I must needs have said somewhat of this. Ralph nodded to him friendly, and even therewith came in the banquet, which was richly served as for a king's son. And wine was poured forth of the best, and they feasted and were merry. And then Ralph told all the tale of his wanderings, how it had betid, bringing in all that Ursula had told him of Utterbol, while as for her, she put no word of it. So that at last Ralph, being wishful to hear her tell somewhat, made more of some things than was really in them, so that she might set him right. But no word more she said for all that, but only smiled on him now and again, and sat blushing like a rose over her golden-flowered gown, while Richard looked on her and praised her in his heart exceedingly. But when Ralph had done the story, which was long, so that by then it was over, it had been dark night some while, Richard said, "Well, fosterling, thou hast seen much and done much, and many would say that thou art a lucky man, and that more and more lieth ready to thine hand. Whither now wilt thou wend, or what wilt thou do?" Ralph's face reddened, as its wont had been when it was 2 years younger, at contention drawing nigh. And he answered, "Where then should I go save to the house of my fathers, and the fields that fed them? What should I do but live amongst my people, warding them from evil, and loving them and giving them good counsel? For wherefore should I love them less than heretofore? Have they become dastards and the fools of mankind?" Quoth Richard, "They are no more fools than they were belike, nor less valiant. But thou art grown wiser and mightier by far, so that thou art another manner of man than thou wert, and the master of masters maybe. To Upmeads wilt thou go, but wilt thou abide there? Upmeads is a fair land, but a narrow. One day is like another there, save when sorrow and harm is blent with it. The world is wide, and now I deem that thou holdest the glory thereof in the hollow of thine hand." Then spake the sage, and said, "Yea, Richard of Swevenham, and how knowest thou but that this sorrow and trouble have not now fallen upon Upmeads? And if that be so, upon whom should they call to their helping, rather than him who can help them most, and is their very lord?" Said Richard, "It may be so, wise man, though as yet we have heard no tidings thereof. But if my lord goeth to their help, yet when the trouble shall be over, will he not betake him thither where fresh deeds await him?" "Nay, Richard," said the sage, "art thou so little a friend of thy fosterling as not to know that when he hath brought back peace to the land, it will be so that both he shall need the people and they him, so that if he go away for a while, yet soon shall he come back? Yea, and so shall the little land it may be grow great." Now had Ralph sat quiet while this talk was going on, and as if he heeded not, and his eyes were set as if he were beholding something far away. Then Richard spoke again, after there had been silence a while. "Wise man, thou sayest sooth. Yea, and so it is, that though we have heard no tale concerning war in Upmeads, yet as it were we have been feeling some stirring of the air about us, even as though matters were changing, great might be undone, and weakness grown to strength. Who can say but our Lord may find deeds to hand, or ever he come to Upmeads?" Ralph turned his head as one awaking from a dream, and he said, "When shall tomorrow be, that we may get us gone from Whitwall, we three, and turn our faces towards Upmeads?" Said Richard, "Wilt thou not tarry a day or two, and talk with thine own mother's son, and tell him of thine haps?" "Yea," said Ralph, "and so would I, were it not that my father's trouble and my mother's grief draw me away." "Oh, tarry not," said Ursula, "nay, not for the passing of the night, but make this hour the sunrise, and be gone by the clear of the moon, for lo, how he shineth through the window." Then she turned to Richard and said, "O fosterer of my love, knowest thou not that as now he speaketh as a friend of the well, and wotteth more far-off tidings than even the wise man of many years?" Said Ralph, "She saith sooth, O Richard. Or how were it if the torch were even now drawing nigh to the high house of Upmeads? Yea, or if the very house were shining as a dreary candle of the meadows, and the reddening of the waters of the ford? What do we hear?" Therewith he thrust the board from him, and arose, and went to his harness. He fell to arming him, and he spake to Richard, "Now shall thine authority open to us the gates of the good town. though the night be growing old. We shall go our ways, dear friend, and mayhappen we shall meet again, or mayhappen not. And thou shalt tell my brother Blaise, who wotteth not of my coming hither, how things have gone with me, and how need hath drawn me hence. And bid him come see me at Upmeads, and to ride with a good band of proper men, for eschewing the dangers of the road. Then spake Richard, I shall tell Lord Blaise neither more nor less than thou mayest tell him thyself, for think it not that thou shalt go without me. As for Blaise, he may well spare me, for he is become a chief and lord of the port. And the port hath now right good men-at-arms, and captains withal younger and defter than I be. But now suffer me to send a swain for my horse and arms, and another to the captain of the watch at Westgate Bar, that he be ready to open to me and 3 of my friends, and to send me a let-pass for the occasion. So shall we go forth, ere it be known that the brother of the Lord of Port is abiding at the Lamb. For verily I see that the lady hath spoken truth, and it is like that she is foreseeing, even as thou hast grown to be. And now I bethink that I might lightly get me a score of men to ride with us, whereas we may meet men worse than ourselves on the way. Said Ralph, All good go with the words, Richard, yet gather not force. There may stout men be cold on the road, and if thou runnest or ridest about the town, we may yet be stayed by Blaise and his men. Wherefore now send for thine horse and arms, and bid the host here open his gates with little noise when we be ready, and we will presently ride out by the clear of the moon. But thou, beloved, shalt don thy armour no more, but shall ride henceforth in thy woman's raiment, for the wild and the waste is well nigh over, and the way is but short after all these months of wandering. And I say that now shall all friends drift towards us, and they that shall rejoice to strike a stroke for my father's son, and the peaceful years of the friend of the well. To those others, and chiefly to Ursula, it seemed that now he spoke strongly and joyously, like to a king and a captain of men. Richard did his bidding, and was swift in dealing with the messengers. But the sage said, Ralph, my son, since ye have lost one man-at-arms, and have gotten but this golden angel in his stead, I may better that. I prithee bid thy man Richard find me armour and weapons, that I may amend the shard in thy company. Thou shalt find me no feeble man when we come to push of staves. Ralph laughed and bade Richard to see it. So he dealt with the host, and bought good war gear of him, and a trenchant sword, and an axe withal. And when the sage was armed, he looked as doughty a warrior as he needs be. By this time was Richard's horse and war gear come, and he armed him speedily, and gave money to the host. And they rode therewith all 4 out of the hostel, and found the street empty and still, for the night was wearing. So rode they without tarrying into Westgate, and came to the bar, and speedily was the gate opened to them. And anon were they on the moonlit road outside of Whitwall. Chapter 14. They ride away from Whitwall. But when they were well on the way, and riding a good pace by the clear of the moon, Richard spake to Ralph, and said, Whither ride we now? Said Ralph, Whither save to Upmeads? Yea, said Richard, but by what road? Shall we ride down to the ford of the swelling flood, and ride the beaten way? Or take to the downland and forest, and so again by the forest and downland and the forest once more, till we come to the Burg of the Four Friths? Which way is shorter? Said Ralph. Forsooth, said Richard, by the wildwood ye may ride shorter, if ye know it as I do. Quoth the sage, Yea, or as I do. Hear a wonder, that 2 men of Swevenham know the wilds more than 20 miles from their own thorp. Said Ralph, Well, wend we the shorter road, why make more word over it? Or what lion lieth on the path? Is it that we may find it hard to give the go-by to the Burg of the Four Friths? Said Richard, Though the burg be not very far from Whitwall, we hear but little tidings thence. Our chapmen but seldom go there, and none cometh to us thence save such as our men have strayed thither. Yet, as I said now in the hostel, there is an air of tidings abroad, and one rumour saith, and none denieth it, that the old fierceness and stout headstrong mood of the burg is broken down, and that men dwell there in peace and quiet. Said the sage, In any case, we have amongst us lore enough to hoodwink them if we be foes, so that we shall pass easily. Not of this need we fear. But Richard put his mouth close to Ralph's ear and spake to him softly, Shall we indeed go by that shorter road? Whatever in days gone by may have befallen in places thereon, to which we must go a night tomorrow? Ralph answered softly in turn, Yea, forsooth, for I were fain to try my heart, how strong it may be. So they rode on, and turned off from the road that led down to the ford of the swelling flood, a night which Ralph had fallen in with Blaise and Richard on that day after the woeful slaying, which had made an end of his joy for that time. But when they were amidst of the bushes and riding a deep gill of the waste, Richard said, It is well that we are here. For now, if Blaise sends riders to bring us back courteously, they shall not follow us at once, but shall ride straight down to the ford, and even cross it in search of us. Yea, said Ralph, it is well in all wise. So then they rode thence a while till the moon grew low, and great, and red, and sank down away from them. And by then were they come to a shepherd's cot, empty of men, with naught therein save an old dog, and some victual, as bread and white cheese, and a well for drinking. So there they abode and rested that night. Chapter 15. A Strange Meeting in the Wilderness. On the morrow betimes they got to the road again. The country at first, though it was scanty of tillage, was not unfurnished of sheep, being for the most part of swelling hills and downs well grassed, with here and there a deep cleft in them. They saw but few houses, and those small and poor. A few shepherds they fell in with, who were short of speech, after the manner of such men, but deemed a greeting not wholly thrown away on such goodly folk as those wayfarers. So they rode till it was noon, and Richard talked more than his wont was, though his daily use it was to be of many words, nor did the sage spare speech. But Ursula spoke little, nor heeded much of what the others said, and Ralph deemed that she was paler than of wont, and her brows were knitted, as if she were somewhat anxious. As for him, he was grave and calm, but a few words. And whiles when Richard was wordiest, he looked on him steadily for a moment, whereat Richard changed countenance, and for a while stinted his speech, but not for long. And whiles Ralph looked about him, inwardly striving to gather together the ends of unhappy thoughts that floated about him, and to note on the land he was passing through, if indeed he had verily seen it aforetime, elsewhere than some evil dream. At last, when they stopped to bait by some scrubby bushes at the foot of a wide hillside, he took Richard apart and said to him, Old friend, and whither go we? Said Richard, As thou wottest, to the Burg of the Four Friths. Yea, said Ralph, but by what road? Said Richard, Youngling, is not thine heart then as strong as thou deemest last night? Ralph was silent a while, and then he said, I know what thou wouldest say. We are going by the shortest road to the Castle of Abundance. He spake this out loud, but Richard nodded his head to him, as if he would say, Yea, so it is, but hold thy peace. But Ralph knew that Ursula had come up behind him, and still looking at Richard, he put his open hand aback toward her, and her hand fell into it. Then he turned about to her and saw that her face was verily pale. So he put his hands on her shoulders and kissed her kindly, and she let her head fall onto his bosom, and fell a-weeping, and the two elders turned away to the horses, and feigned to be busy with them. Thus then they bided some minutes of time, and then all gat to horse again, and Ursula's face was cleared of the grief of fear, and the colour had come back to her cheeks and lips. But Ralph's face was stern and sorrowful to behold. Howbeit, as they rode away, he spake in a loud and seeming cheerful voice, Still ever shorteneth more and more the way to my father's house. And withal I am wishful to see if it be indeed true that the men of the Burg have become mild and peaceful, and to know what hath befallen those doughty champions of the Dry Tree, and if perchance they have any will to hold us a tilting in courteous fashion. Richard smiled on him and said, Thou holdest more then by the Dry Tree than by the Burg, though while agone we deemed the champions worse men to meet in the woods than the burghers. So it is, said Ralph, but men are oft missaid by them that know them not thoroughly. And now, if it were a good wish, O sage of Swevenham, I were fain to fall in with the best of all those champions. A tall man and a proper, who meseems had good will toward me, I know not why. Quoth the sage, If thou canst not see the end of this wish fulfilled, no more can I. And yet meseems something may I follow it, which is akin to grief. Be content with things so done, my son. Now Ralph held his peace, and they sped on their way, Ursula riding close by Ralph's side, and caressing him with looks, and by touch also when she might. And after a while he fell to talking again, and ever in the same loud, cheerful voice, till at last, in about another hour, they came in sight of the stream which lay down toward the swelling flood, from that pool wherein Erst the Lady of Abundance had bathed her before the murder. Hard looked Ralph on the stream, but howsoever his heart might ache with the memory of that past grief, like as the body aches with the bruise of yesterday's blow, yet he changed countenance but little, and in his voice was the same cheery sound. But Ursula noted him, and how his eyes wandered, and how little he heeded the words of the others, and she knew what ailed him, for long ago he had told her all that tale, and so now her heart was troubled, and she looked on him and was silent. Thus, then, a little before sunset, they came on that steep cliff, with the cave therein, and the little green plain thereunder, and the rocky bank going down sheer into the water of the stream. Forsooth they came on it somewhat suddenly, from out of the bushes of the valley. And there indeed not only the sage and Richard, but Ursula also were stayed by the sight as folk compelled, for all three knew what had befallen there. But Ralph, though he looked over his shoulder at it all, yet rode on steadily. And when he saw that the others lingered, he waved his hand and cried out as he rode, On, friends, on, for the road shortens towards my father's house. Then were they ashamed and shook their reins to hasten after him. But in that very nick of time there came forth from one amidst the bushes that edged the pool of the stream, and strode dripping to the shallow, a man brown and hairy, and naked, save for a green wreath about his middle. Tall he was, above the stature of most men, awful of aspect, and his eyes glittered from his dark brown face amidst of his shock-head of the colour of rain-spoiled hay. He stood and looked while one might count 5, and then without a word or cry rushed up from the water straight on Ursula, who was riding first of the 3 lingerers. And in the twinkling of an eye he tore her from off her horse, and she was in a grasp as the cushat in the claws of the kite. Then he cast her to earth, and stood over her shaking a great club, but or ever he brought it down he turned his head over his shoulder toward the cliff and the cave therein. And in that same moment first one blade and then another flashed about him, and he fell crashing down upon his back, smitten in the breast and the side by Richard and Ralph, and the wounds were deep and deadly. Ralph heeded him no more, but drew Ursula away from him, and raised her up and laid her head upon his knee, and she had not quite swooned away, and forsooth had taken but little hurt, only she was dizzy with terror, and the heaving up and casting down. She looked up into Ralph's face, and smiled on him, and said, What hath been done to me, and why did he do it? His eyes were still wild with fear and wrath, and he answered, O beloved, death and the foemen of old came forth from the cavern of the cliff. What did they say there, Lord God? And he caught thee to slay thee, but him have I slain. Nevertheless, it is a terrible and evil place. Let us go hence. Yea, she said, let us go speedily. Then she stood up, weak and tottering still, and Ralph arose and put his left arm about her, to stay her. And lo, there before him was Richard kneeling over the wild man, and the sage was coming back from the river with his headpiece full of water. So Ralph cried out, To horse, Richard, to horse! Hast thou not done slaying the woodman? But therewith came a weak and hoarse voice from the earth, and the wild man spake, Child of Upmeads, drive not on so hard, it will not be long, for thou and Richard the Red are not light-handed. Ralph marvelled that the wild man knew him and Richard, but the wild man spake again, Hearken, thou lover, thou young man. But therewith was the sage come to him, and kneeling beside him with the water. And he drank thereof, while Ralph said to him, What is this, woodman? And canst thou speak my Latin? What art thou? Then the wild man, when he had drunk, raised him up a little, and said, Young man, Thou and Richard are deft leeches. Ye have let me blood to a purpose, and have brought back to me my wits, which were wandering wide. Yet am I indeed where my fool's brains told me I was. Then he lay back again, and turned his head as well as he could toward the cavern in the cliff. But Ralph deemed he had heard his voice before, and his heart was softened toward him, he knew not why. But he said, Yea, but wherefore didst thou fall upon the lady? The wild man strove with his weakness, and said angrily, What did another woman there? Then he said in a calmer but weaker voice, Nay, my wits shall wander no more from me. We will make the journey together, I and my wits. But, O young man, this I will say if I can. Thou fleddest from her and forgattest her. I came to her and forgot all but her. Yea, my very life I forgat. Again he spoke, and his voice was weaker yet. Kneel down by me, or I may not tell thee what I would. My voice dieth before me. Then Ralph knelt down by him, for he began to have a deeming of what he was. And he put his face close to the dying man's, and said to him, I am here. What wouldst thou? Said the wild man very feebly, I did not much for thee time was. How might I when I loved her so sorely? But I did a little, believe it, and do so much for me that I may lie down by her side when I am dead, who never lay by her living. For into the cave I durst go never. Then Ralph knew him, and that he was the tall champion whom he had first met in the churchyard gate of Netherton. So he said, I know thee now, and I will promise to do thy will herein. I am sorry that I have slain thee. Forgive it me. A mocking smile came into the dying man's eyes, and he spake whispering, Richard it was, not thou. The smile spread over his face, and strove to turn more towards Ralph, and said in a very faint whisper, The last time. No more he said, but gave up the ghost presently. The sage rose up from his side and said, Ye may now bury this man as he craved of thee, for he is dead. Thus hath thy wish been accomplished, for this was the great champion, and the Duke of the men of the Dry Tree. Indeed, it is a pity of him that he is dead, for as terrible as he was to his foes, he was no ill man. Spake Richard, Now was the riddle areaded of the wild man and the mighty giant that haunted these passes. We have played together, or now in days long past, he and I, and ever he came to his above. He was a wise man and a prudent, that he should have become a wild man. It is a great pity of him. But Ralph took his knight's cloak of red scarlet, and they lapped the wild man therein, who had once been a champion be-worshipped. But first Ursula, shearing his hair and his beard, till the face of him came back again, grave and somewhat mocking, as Ralph remembered it, time was. Then they bore him in the four corners across the stream, and up on the lawn before the cliff. And Richard and the sage bore him into the cave, and laid him down there beside the howe which Ralph had erstwhile heaped over the lady. And now over him also they heaped stones. Meanwhile Ursula knelt at the mouth of the cave and wept. But Ralph turned him about and stood on the edge of the bank, and looked over the ripple of the stream onto the valley, where the moon was now beginning to cast shadows, till there was two came out of the cave for the last time. Then Ralph turned to Ursula, and raised her up and kissed her, and they went down all of them from that place of death and ill hap, and gat to horse on the other side of the stream. They rode 3 miles further on by the glimmer of the moon, and lay down to rest amongst the bushes of the waste, with few words spoken between them. This is the end of chapters 12 through 15 of Book 4 of The Well at the World's End, a tale by William Morris. In the next video, we will proceed to chapter 16, entitled, They Come to the Castle of Abundance Once More. Thank you for listening.